Well, friends, good morning. Welcome to folks across Minnesota and across the nation, and several logging in from around the world to today's webinar, Life Begins at 55, but so might the driving challenges. This webinar is part of Minnesota's 2021 TZD webinar series. My name is Mark Kindy. I'm one of the Minnesota's TZD co-chairs and the manager of the Injury and Violence Prevention section at the Minnesota Department of Health. We have a vexing and perplexing problem. We have mayhem going on in Minnesota's roads and traffic ways, and we want to do our best to intervene and do something about it. Our great thanks to and for all the individuals who've helped to put this TZD webinar series together. We have session organizers, e-leaders, speakers, moderators, technology gurus, and folks behind the scenes too numerous to mention. We depend on our partnership with the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota and their organizational and technological expertise. So thanks, colleagues at CTS, very grateful. Without all of you doing what you've done, this just would not have happened. I also want to thank our hosts, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, my colleagues at the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and my colleagues at the Minnesota Department of Health. Our deep thanks also to our sponsors in this 2021 webinar series, Bolton and Menk, AAA of Minnesota and Iowa, the Auto Club Group, HDR, Highway Credit Union, and the Minnesota Prevention Alliance. Thank you to all of our sponsors for supporting traffic safety and the TZD program. Now, before we start our official webinar topic today, we're excited to recognize our TZD award recipient. And today we're acknowledging and awarding the Minnesota Emergency Nurses Association, or ENA, for their great work. They have developed the DOSI, or the Driver Orientation Screen for Cognitive Impairment. This award is a screening tool that Minnesota law enforcement officers and agencies have been using to help officers determine during a roadside stop if a driver is cognitively impaired or too disoriented to be allowed to continue driving. This tool has made its way into at least 50 law enforcement agencies across the state, and it's filled a specific key training gap in older driver safety awareness education. The Minnesota ENA consists of more than 740 members across the state. They promote safe practice, safe care, community safety, advocacy, and injury prevention. The Minnesota ENA State Council is eligible to apply for state grants, and by collaborating with the state of Minnesota and TZD, is able to carry out a variety of patient safety initiatives related to injury prevention. My great colleague, Joni Soames, is here today representing the Minnesota Emergency and Nurses Association, and I welcome her to share some thoughts with us. Joni?
Well, thanks, Mark. First of all, I can't take credit for completely developing DOSI. What we did was we found DOSI that was already an evidence-based screening tool available out there, but we did have to, and with permission, adopt it for Minnesota. And there's so many great stories that our law enforcement are sharing with us, how they are capturing some of, maybe I shouldn't say capturing, they're finding some of our drivers that aren't safe on the road and they're getting them home safely. So I have the award that you sent to us. It's really awesome. I'm sharing it with the rest of our emergency nurses across the state. And we want to thank you so very much on behalf of all of the emergency nurses for this award. It's been really wonderful to do this project. And I look forward to continuing to do it with the rest of our nurses, as well as sharing a little bit about it as we go through this session today. So thank you once again.
Joni, thank you. And thanks again to your colleagues at the ENA, our Minnesota Emergency Nurses Association. Now, friends, welcome to today's moderator, Scott Edgeworth, our East Metro Regional TZD Coordinator. And Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Let me get this next slide up. For those of you who might be joining late, I would like to join and welcome you to today's webinar, Life Begins at 55, but so might the driving challenges. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers for you today, but first, a few housekeeping rules. Remember, if you have questions for our speakers, please put in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That's going to be the right of the screen. You can also ask for technical help through the Q&A box. We will get to your questions at the conclusion of the presentation. If there is a question that needs immediate attention, I can interject at an appropriate time. The TZD webinar series is proud to offer continuing education credits. These listed credits are available for this webinar. To find the form, please go to the Life Begins at 55 webpage. For all of our law enforcement viewers, post-board credits are also available for this webinar. Please read the important announcement correction. Whether you are watching this webinar live or recorded, please watch the webinar in its entirety and follow the instructions on the TZD website. The link to this website webpage can be found in the chat box. The University of Minnesota will submit your completed affidavit of attendance and report to the post board for you. Now, on to the topic for today. Life begins at 55, but so might the driving challenges. We have multiple speakers today. Our first speaker will be Joni Soames. Joni Soames worked at an emergency nurses for 40 years and has been working as an emergency nurse care educator for 46 years. She currently works for Regions Hospital EMS as a critical care educator and does special projects for the Minnesota Department of Health. Following Joni will be Ann Forrest Clark. Ann is occupational therapist at St. Luke's and driver rehabilitation program coordinator at Safe Driver LLC. She has been an occupation therapist for 39 years, assisting older drivers with clinical testing. After Ann, we'll have Alan Ainsworth. Alan Ainsworth is a deputy state coordinator for the Minnesota AARP driver safety, overseeing the 9-county area around the Twin Cities. Previously, he spent more than 50 years in the computer industry, holding senior management positions at Honeywell and several startup companies, computer companies. And then our last speaker will be Rachel Wilson. Rachel is a driver education and traffic safety expert. She is the director of driver education programs at AAA, the Auto Club Group, which covers 14 states, including most of Minnesota, Quebec, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The speaker's presentation will begin momentarily.
Joni, we're seeing your screen, but we can't.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, thank you.
Now, but you might want to go back.
Yeah, I gotta. Sorry about that. Old people, you know, we have a little bit of trouble. Kind of makes the point. So driving, aging, and road safety is currently the project that I've been working on throughout Minnesota. And as you heard earlier, working a little bit on how we can help our older drivers be safer on the road. So this kind of puts into perspective a little bit of what we're talking about. The first thing that we needed to realize is that one of the things that we have to recognize is any age driver may present with impaired or unsafe driving behaviors. But one of the things we also recognized is that aging seems to accompany the changes that affect driving. There, we finally think I got the computer working correctly. So physical changes accompany aging, including less strength, less flexibility, difficulty seeing and hearing. Our nervous system seems to work less well. Our cognitive systems also change as well. And if this guy isn't distracting you by now, he certainly should be. And that's part of what happens along with aging. We find is as we age, we have trouble processing sensory information, sorting out these distractions, and lastly, responding in a timely and appropriate manner to what's going out on the roads. And we can actually see driving changes as we age. Some of the things include poor judging of distances and other vehicles coming towards us, difficulty having enough strength to brake or accelerate. And while I'm not going to read all of these different items on the screen for each of you, not recognizing unsafe situations, becoming distracted or overwhelmed, even having trouble seeing the street signs are some of the reasons that we're seeing as we age, we do not drive nearly as safely as we did when we were a lot younger. Additionally, as we age, what we learn is that we have medical conditions that can affect our driving ability. Someone who's maybe had a stroke or having a stroke, or diabetics, and people with like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and even with arthritis, have peripheral neuropathy, so they can't feel their foot on the gas pedal or the brake pedal. And I think a lot of people recognize visual issues happen as we age, but how often do they think about heart and lung diseases causing weakness to the point that we can't steer our vehicle or drive our vehicle as safely as we will? And arthritis is another one of those ones that can actually make it painful to hang on to the wheel or to push on a gas or the brake pedal. Again, additionally, what we often find is as we age, we also start taking medications that can affect our ability to drive safely. And pain medications is something that everybody would say, well, yeah, of course. But how about medications for seizures or muscle relaxers or even medicines to help with nausea are all different medications that if you read the bottles very carefully, it says, do not drive when you're taking this medication. And you might wonder why that is on for perhaps a blood pressure medicine or a heart medication bottle. But we've found is sometimes when someone drops their blood pressure very significantly quickly, or their heart rate quickly, or the blood sugar medicine is another one that can suddenly make the person not able to control their vehicle nearly as well as they should. And one of the things that as I go out and speak, not only with our law enforcement agents and agencies, but also with our older drivers, because that's the group I'm getting to talk with more and more frequently, is sharing the information about this and how they can find information related to their medications, including talking to their physician or their nurse practitioner or their pharmacist. But one of the things that we know is that if you look at any of these physical or cognitive changes, they can actually lead to driving errors that are similar to someone driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And this is an evidence-based statement, and it always made me a little nervous. And I'm glad we're actually working on this a little bit, because we can't always assume that they're drunk or they're drugged. It could be that they're having some problems with disorientation, and that's where the cognitive impairment awareness and screening for it comes into play. You can't hardly do a talk without a little bit of statistics. And basically, I just wanted to bring up the fact that the number of crashes and fatalities involving older adults has increased from 2011 through 2019. And actually, if you look at even the newer data, the numbers are still going up a little bit. And it's gotten to the point that we actually have added to the strategic plan for the highway an awareness related to risks of safe driving, and adding a screen related to how can we know if someone's in trouble. The DOSI screen was intended for law enforcement, but we're learning that the rest of us can do a little bit of screening as well. And that's what I'm going to cover just for a short bit and during my segment of this panel. One of the other ways to look at this is the number of crashes involving failure to yield right away in those over the age of 2065. And the last data that I was able to pull was 2016, but it makes perfectly good sense that there's 3 times the number of failure to yield right away in your older driver, those over 65, just because of those physical and cognitive changes. They're having harder time seeing, they're having harder time judging distance. They can't push that gas pedal more quickly to get in front of that vehicle. And what we're finding is a lot of head-on collisions or T-bone collisions in the older adult simply because of those changes. And that's not to say we have to stop driving when we're older, but it says we need to learn how to accommodate and adjust what we're doing and how we respond. And it may mean the guy behind you is blowing their horn because you don't make that left turn on the blinking yellow arrow. But you know what? If you're safer, it's a smarter idea. And that's what we're teaching our older drivers. In fact, it became enough of an issue that part of the strategic plan for the state did include older drivers. And I was never so glad to see that when that came out this spring, because I thought, yay, we're starting to look at people that are my age out there driving and what can I do to be a safer person. So the good news is, or maybe it's not the good news, because it does impact our independence. But many of us, by the time we hit about age 75, realize that we shouldn't be driving. And it's often because we realize our vision isn't as good as it should be, our strength or mobility isn't as good as it should be. Some of us even realize our cognitive abilities aren't too well. Or maybe our physicians have said, you know what, you may want to back off on driving or limit when you drive because of medical conditions or the medications you're taking. And some people take this recommendation very well. Other people do not. And that's sometimes where we need to step in. And that's been part of my message out there, is to be able to recognize who is not driving as safely as they can and identify, is there a way we can make them safer, and talk with them about it? Or is there something that we need to do actively? And that's where law enforcement has come in initially, but it's going to be part of all of our jobs to do that. So when you think about someone with cognitive impairment, and this is maybe the newer part for the rest of you, is what are some signs of cognitive changes? Especially when someone becomes stressed, they become confused or anxious. They may drive like they're lost. They may not be able to find things. And stories I hear about searching for driver's licenses or keys, or where did I put my purse, things like that. Not even being able to answer questions because they're searching for words or getting lost, are all some of the things that are signs that someone is cognitively impaired. And their inability to handle a vehicle correctly may be one of those things that we're starting to see. On the left-hand side of the screen, you notice that most of us are pretty good at age 65 to 74. But as we age, we find that we have a harder and harder time with that processing type things. And one of the things that we have learned is that many people can hide cognitive changes or compensate for them until they become stressed. And if there's anything that will put you at stress, it's an unusual traffic situation. And I like this slide because what I'm learning is a lot of people can go out and they can drive a car by muscle memory. They remember how to turn it on. They remember how to back out of the driveway. They remember how to get to the end of the street. And then all of a sudden a traffic situation comes up, and it's not route memory anymore. They have to take a new action. They have to have more concentration. They have to be able to process the information and coordinate their muscles to do things a little bit better. And all of that slows down as we age. So even though we can get that car out into the road, what we find is unusual situations, higher traffic, or road construction will suddenly make our older driver, and sometimes it's not all that old, keep that in mind, have a difficult time driving. So how are you able to measure drivers' cognitive ability? And as mentioned earlier, the driver orientation screen for cognitive impairment, or DOSI screen, was actually developed by the University of California, San Diego, and they gave us permission to adapt it for anyone on the roads. So DOSI can be used for people walking, people driving their bicycles, their motorcycles, etc. And it consists of 9 questions that are asked of the driver. And I know you're looking at this going, well, it's a good thing this is my screen at home because I can actually read it. When I show this across bigger rooms, I actually make the printing a little bit bigger. And as you can see, these are not tough questions. What is your date of birth and where do you live and what state are you in? And you might think, well, everybody should know all of those until you get to 7 to 9. And I'm not always sure what's 7 to 9. If I could tell you what the day is, I can usually tell you the month, I can usually tell you the year. And then I think, well, am I in trouble? So what law enforcement has been taught, and they each have little cards like the one in the previous slide that they can fit into their pocket. They've been taught to just kind of work these questions in a conversation if they pull someone over who is not driving in a safe manner. Now, obviously, they're going to rule out intoxication or medical conditions before they start going, okay, they're just disoriented. And honestly, it doesn't have to just be law enforcement that's using this. I'm finding a lot of my senior drivers love to have these little cards as well because they use it on their spouse for some reason. So what do the scores mean for them? If you can answer all but 1 or 2 questions correctly, the evidence shows you should be able to follow the rules of the road, absorb what's going on, and drive in a safe manner. If you're getting 3 or 4 of those questions wrong, that person may be confused and interpreting or having trouble interpreting what is being said, asked, or the traffic information. The interesting part is this is where that muscle memory comes in. It's like if you took them out of that specific situation where someone's asking them these questions, they may be able to answer them normally, but when you stress them, they cannot. So this may be a situational confusion and it may clear, but it's one of those things that we say it's probably not good to have them on the road right now. If they're getting 5 or more of those questions wrong, and remember, they were pretty basic. This is a person who's probably highly confused. It's not new. They managed to get the keys. They got in the car. They started driving, and now they're lost. And these are the drivers that are often found dead in their vehicles or involved in a crash. But it's definitely time for them to not drive at that moment. And that's the message that we're getting out to people. Because ultimately, we know they're probably not safe enough to process the information how to drive. And it may clear, but it may be one of those things where that patient needs to be reevaluated. And that's where this whole thing of assessing cognitive and physical impairment goes to. Now, I know you can't read this screen and I'll blow it up in just a second, but the DOSI screen is just simply one of many screens that are available out there. And my friend Ann is going to talk a little bit more about each of those, but to just kind of give you an idea, what we look at when we're looking at driver safety through across the whole group is what is their driving history like? How well do they act independently? What's their vision like? What's their thinking like? And what is their motor skills? And there are a variety of different tests that can look for this and a variety of different levels at which they can be done. A simple medical screening that we use often in emergency room even is how well can they do the mini cognitive screen? Can they repeat 3 words? That you tell them? Can they draw a clock and show the hands at 10 past 10? And then do they remember the words that you gave them for a little bit earlier? And if they can't remember those words, how well are they going to remember how to drive their vehicle or where they're going? A much more involved test that we're talking with the physicians especially about, but I know that our driver rehab specialists do, is the MOCA, or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Screen. And you can see that this assesses for a lot of different things, all the way up to executive function and critical thinking. And all of these skills listed on the screen are needed for safe driving. And you might say, oh my gosh, that must be a really complicated test. And in fact, it is. But the things that it's looking for is how well can persons follow directions, like go from A to 1 to B to 2 to C to 3 to D. How well can they get through a maze? How well can they remember where they're going? And these are all tests that will help to determine how well the brain is processing things. They've actually identified that scores of less than 20 or less than 18 on a MOCA, or if it takes you longer than 3 minutes to follow the trail or longer than 3 minutes to get through a maze, you're probably going to have driving errors. And the more clock-making errors they have, the more driving errors they have. So we do have a way to screen for cognition. And now it's getting the message out that we need to start thinking about if we've got someone who's not thinking clearly, we need to think about having them assessed. There's also a screen that looks at how easily they can get up and move around. How well can they move those legs? How well can they move their arms? If they're taking too long, this is a person who may not be able to drive safely. Another test that's out there is much more complicated, and it includes all of the visual fields, their ability to see the eye chart that you see there, or do they see on both sides of their eyes? And when we do our driver's relicensing, we do actually check to see if they can see on both sides of their eyes. But if you don't go to someone who specifically is looking at range of motion, or the other are cognitive tests, those are not assessed. So each level of assessment gets a little bit more complicated. If we have someone we're concerned about, we have another level or another helper that's out there, and that's the request for examination of driver. And a lot of folks, I wish somebody would take the onus off of me of saying you should stop driving. And the reality of it is if you send this form to the Department of Vehicular Services, they will actually help you with that. You can explain what the person's driving skills are like, and they can evaluate that person if that form is filled out well enough. And law enforcement is getting information how the DOSI can be used with this, but all of the screening tools are very helpful with this. And folks are afraid to fill this form out because they think it's an automatic revocation of licenses. But the reality of it is it's only the first step of reevaluating how they drive. What happens is they evaluate the form. Then they will ask the driver to come in if the form makes them nervous enough about that person's driving ability. They do another screening. If the people at DVS's medical unit feels that that person is maybe a little shaky as far as driving, they may retest them, or they may send them on to have a medical evaluation. And this is where that bigger screen comes in. The doctor can decide if the person should drive or not. He may say they should be retested. He may say that they should be retrained, or he may send them to the next level, and that's our driving rehab specialist. And Ann's going to talk a lot more about that. But ultimately, my point is of all of this is if you think someone is cognitively impaired or physically impaired with driving, or their actual way that they live, you may want to start the process to see if we can keep that person a little bit more safe on the road. And know that ultimately, it's not always that we're going to take their license away, but we may adjust how it is that they're going to drive. So our occupational therapist is like our next screen in the area, and they do such a much more thorough and better job of identifying what's going on. And then they send a note back to our physician, and the physician sends a note back to DVS and says, yes, no, or this person shouldn't drive. They may recommend some safety things that Alan's going to talk about, and that Rachel's going to talk about with how you can be a safer driver. So part of my whole project has been related to identifying who's at risk and then giving them the resources to help them be a safer driver, or suggest that maybe it's time to not be driving anymore. So in closing, I'm just going to say, remember that what we're looking for is all of us to think about looking how well our drivers out there are thinking, how well they're performing. And if they're not doing a great job, maybe we should think about having them evaluated a little bit further. And it may be officially, it may be unofficially, but I can tell you when I talk to older drivers, they're actually okay with this idea. They say, you know what? It's good to help us be safe out there, and thank you for that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann. My email is there if anyone needs to contact me. I'm always open to emails. And thank you so much for listening. Ann, it's your turn.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ann Forrest Clark, and I'm an occupational therapist at St. Luke's in Duluth, Minnesota. I'm also the owner and operator of Safer Driver Driving School. Through the Safer Driver Driving School, I'm a licensed driving instructor, and I complete behind the wheel assessments, especially with senior drivers. Oops. There we go. I want you to think about the importance of driving in our daily lives. It's more than just the ability to operate a motor vehicle. It's really a level of independence. How important it was to you when you first got past your driver's assessment when you were maybe 16. And then conversely, as people age or have difficulties due to disability, not being able to drive is really a loss of control, and it's a point where people often grieve that loss when I recommend that it's time to retire from driving. We use driving in order to access our community for many things, but just also for the basic necessities like purchasing food, getting to the doctor, getting to the laundromat? How about taking our pets to the vet if they're ill or injured? It's also the way that we socially engage with our community, whether it's connecting with friends, attending worship services, meeting up with family members. Many of us have to drive to be able to do that. So driving is an instrumental activity of daily living. That means that it's a task vital to being able to live independently. It's also the most dangerous IADL that we perform, because if we mess up, we can hurt ourselves and we can hurt other people. And because this is an area, because this is an activity of daily living, it's an area that occupational therapists can provide services for evaluation and treatment and be reimbursed through Medicare. So what is occupational therapy? Occupational therapy is a service that helps people be able to perform their routine tasks of daily living. For some people, it might be dressing, bathing, preparing a meal, but for many, it's also driving. And then we also assess the skills that it takes to perform the driving task, our physical control, our visual skills, and our thinking skills. OTs generally fall into two roles in the world of driver rehabilitation. An OT as a generalist is that basic stripped down Swiss Army knife. We've got the blade, we've got the little scissors, and maybe you've got the can opener. You have the basic awareness of what community mobility needs are for a person, how to include it in the treatment plan. You might be able to do some of the clinical skills testing, but you're going to refer on for the behind the wheel testing. And you're also going to help provide some education regarding alternate mobility resources if an individual is not able to drive. When an occupational therapist is a driver rehab specialist, that means they've got the big Swiss Army knife with all of the little gadgets. That means we can do clinical testing, we can do on the road evaluations, we can write prescriptions for adaptive equipment for vehicles. We can train the people in how to use that adaptive equipment. We also counsel in driving retirement, and again, help people identify alternative community mobility options if we recommend driving retirement. There's two levels of credentialing of driver rehabilitation specialists. The first one is through the Association of Driver Rehab Specialists. I know the acronym ADED does not match the name of the organization. It was changed, it's just a mismatch, and they hold the credential called Certified Driver Rehab Specialist. We also have the credential in our state of licensed driving instructor, and you must be a Minnesota licensed driving instructor in order to be able to provide on the road driving assessments or driver training. To have a comprehensive driver rehabilitation program, you need to have professionals that have both credentials, that are licensed driving instructors as well as certified driver rehab specialists. So a certified driver rehab specialist, or CDRS, works with governmental agencies like the folks here today, with auto manufacturers, with people that are creating new and unique ways to access vehicles, and ways to help improve driving safety and vehicle accessibility. We also, as licensed driving instructors, perform on the road tests and identify, does this person need hand controls? Would this person be appropriate for a left foot gas pedal? Maybe this individual, because of their severe arthritis, is in need of a steering knob or tri-pin steering device. Those are the sorts of things that we perform. When I start out with an individual, I'm completing a clinical skills assessment to make sure their visual skills, their physical skills, their thinking skills meet the state standards, that, you know, their acuity is at least 20/40. If it's worse than or less than that, then we have to look at restrictive licenses. Then I would complete an on-the-road evaluation to make sure that what I found in the clinic is actual performance out on the road. Many times people that have difficulty with the English language, whether it's because it's a second language to them or because they've had a stroke or a brain injury that's caused some speech problems, or even people with lower educational levels do poorly on some of the clinical testing. And so the real gold standard is taking them out on the road. And then lastly, pulling the information from clinical assessment to on-the-road assessment, pulling that all together, providing recommendations and referrals if needed. Clinical assessments are billed to Medicare. They're billable to Medicare and third-party insurance, which is a very important thing because otherwise that can be a barrier for people accessing that service. I complete a medical and driving history review. Believe me, Sasha Reese at the Medical Driver Evaluation Unit is on my speed dial because I'm checking out what moving violations, what the issue is at the state, excuse me. And I'm thoroughly assessing visual, physical, and cognitive skills. Through over 21 different standardized assessments. My assessment takes approximately 2 hours to complete all of the testing that's done. And then lastly, providing education regarding resources to help keep people safe on the road. Think of the skills that go into driving from a physical perspective. You have to be able to coordinate your eyes and hands to grip the wheel, to turn the wheel. You have to coordinate your eyes and feet, being able to press the gas and the brake in relationship to the speed that you want to travel. You need to be able to coordinate your eyes, your hands, and your feet to activate the gas brake, to turn, to make good decisions with regards to the road conditions. Excuse me. And lastly, you have to be pretty flexible. You have to be able to turn and look over your shoulder to check your blind spot, or we need to look at compensations for those if you're having deficits in those areas. Visual skills. The statistic is that 90% of the sensory information that we take in to make decisions on the road comes through our visual system. So occupational therapists spend a lot of time looking at visual skills. We look at acuity, sharpness of focus. We look at depth perception. The biggie is contrast sensitivity. That's our vision in low-level light situations. Many times I find that people will have an acuity, say, of 20/40, but when we turn down the lights, their low contrast sensitivity, it might drop to 2200. And those are people that are essentially night blind and should not be driving. And many times they have no awareness of it. We look at visual attention. That means ability to focus on the targets in front of them and switch their focus if they need to because something else around them is occurring that might be a hazard or might make a difference in the way that they're proceeding. We look at scanning skills. How quickly and efficiently can they move their eyes across the environment in which they're traveling? And we look at visual field awareness, meaning how big of a picture of the world do they have. In the state of Minnesota, you have to have at least 105-degree field of view in order to be able to drive. We look at thinking skills, and this is a challenge to assess quickly and efficiently, but we're looking at spatial awareness. Are people able to recognize speed and movement? Are they able to quickly transfer their attention? Are they able to sequence and follow directions, whether they're written or verbal? Are they able to pathfind, like figure out their way with or without a map? And are they able to be mentally flexible? Say, for example, they're driving and there's a road detour sign. Are they able to follow that detour and look at alternate paths? And the last two are hazard recognition. If you were a person on the road driving behind this truck that has the open window with a lot of loose lumber in there, you would know that you would want to back off and not follow too closely because that lumber could be flying out towards you if they go over a bump. And then you also have to be able to make a quick, safe decision if lumber does fly out of there. Should I swerve to avoid it, or do I have cars on either side of me and swerving would not be the thing to do? So I have offered authored a tool called the Driving Risk Calculator. And it's an occupational therapy assessment that looks at all of the areas of medical, driving history, physical skills, visual skills, cognitive skills. And it comes up, it takes the scores from all of the standardized tests that have relevance to the task of driving and has three basic recommendations: either driving retirement, a need for a behind the wheel assessment, or it looks good, the person can continue to drive. All of the scores are based on a threshold of low, moderate, or high risk impairment for potential involvement in a motor vehicle crash. I did not make up these tests. These are tests that are already standardized by other individuals. What I did was place them on this continuum to help the clinicians identify the next steps. The Driving Risk Calculator has been the subject of a research project through ADED, through the Association of Driver Rehab Specialists and Clemson University School of Automotive Engineering. I just recently did a 6-hour presentation at our national ADED conference, instructing occupational therapists, driving instructors internationally in how to complete the Driving Risk Calculator. And it's currently utilized in over 8 hospital and clinic settings up here in northern Minnesota. If I recommend driving retirement, then my most important thing is to be able to help people still get around, figure out what kind of mobility, community mobility needs that they have, refer for social services support to be able to access those community mobility supports, help provide them with information regarding paratransit, bus, volunteer drivers, et cetera. Really, I can't walk away if they don't have a way to access their community. This is a picture of what a comprehensive driver rehab program would look like. At the bottom level, we're identifying what are the community mobility needs of the individual. The next level would be doing the clinical skills testing that I talked about earlier. We would progress to the behind the wheel testing and then ultimately resource education. And if someone does really well, that's great. I'm still doing that next step and providing them with information about the safe, mature driver education courses offered through AAA, offered through AARP, because we want to keep people on the road for as safely as long as we can. So it's important for you to know that there are comprehensive occupational therapy driver rehab programs throughout the state. I prepared a handout that's attached to the website with this presentation that identifies all of the hospitals and clinics that are providing driver rehab services. The bulk of them are in the Twin Cities, but several of them are outstate. You can also access the ADED website, which is one of the websites listed in the resources, to find a certified driver rehab specialist or a driver rehab program anywhere in the United States and Canada. They have a comprehensive list on that website. So in closing, I want you to remember that driving is an instrumental activity of daily living, that occupational therapists working as driver rehab specialists can look at both skills in the clinic and on the road, that clinical assessments are reimbursable by Medicare. Behind the wheel assessments are not, but clinical skills are reimbursable by Medicare. So at least we need to get people to that point. And it's the work of all of us that keeps our roads safer. So please refer for driver rehabilitation assessments if you are concerned about an individual's performance on the road. Thank you. I'm turning it over to Alan.
Oh, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So Anne and Joni have given us all the sad things that happen when we get old and impact our driving. I want to talk about education and how we can make the more mature drivers in this world more aware of what they can do to be aware of the problems that we've all been talking about. So moving on, we're going to talk about 4 programs that AARP are involved with. One of them is the driver safety classes, sometimes known as 55 and alive. Also defensive driving, depending on which group are teaching them. And then a technology overview, which is a smart driver tech program. And then car fit, which makes sure that you're sitting comfortably in your car and safely. And the final program is the We Need to Talk. And I'll go into more details with that in a minute. So let's start with the driver safety classes. Most of you probably know this, but the main incentive, of course, is a 10% discount on vehicle insurance. Minnesota is one of 38 states that mandate that. So that makes people a little bit more interested in joining the class. There are 34 different organizations that are sanctioned in Minnesota. I just want to give a shout out, though, that 4 of the majority of the classes are given by 4 different groups, 4 major groups: AAA, AARP, Minnesota Safety Council, and the St. Cloud Research Group. And they teach about 90% of the classes. So the classes, when in non-COVID times, are in class, in person. The online version has been available for some time. And now, of course, due to COVID, we now have the virtual class through Zoom. So that makes life safer and easier for many people. You probably know that it's an 8-hour class when you first start, and then you refresh every 3 years with a 4-hour class in Minnesota. Key subjects are things like changes in bodies, all the things that Joni talked about, and then things like road design, vehicle technology, laws, everything that could impact your driving capabilities and safety. And then we also talk about a discussion when to stop driving. The good news is that in the last full year, pre-COVID, we taught over 106,000 people. That's with the 34 different organizations. And 25% of those was online. And of course, that number is starting to go up now as a percentage as younger people start coming on, the 55-year-olds, and people get more adept at using computers and so on. The problem is, though, that the trend is flat in terms of how many we're teaching. So if we look at this graph, the top line shows the sort of estimated number of 55 plus population in Minnesota. And you'll see that it's growing, of course. At the moment, we're probably at around 1.5 million. By 2025, it's estimated that us older is going to be up in the 2 million group area. So, but if you look at the bottom line, you'll see the number of people we're teaching. So even though 108,000 is a pretty good number, it is way short of the million of the market potential, and of course at the moment 1.5 million. It's not quite that bad in the sense of we teach as we saw every 3 years, so people come back for their refresher courses. So the real number is really about 300, on average of 300,000 when you aggregate those 3 years together. So again, it's a little better, but we're still, in 2015, we're about 30%. Today, we're around about 20% of the market potential. So we're very worried about that. But one of the things we're doing is we've just started a couple of weeks ago, 2 months ago, actually now, we started a coalition of the key stakeholders. So people like Minnesota Safety Council, ourselves, AAA, and so on, are getting together to see what we can do to promote and increase awareness of the program. So hopefully those numbers will start getting better as we move forward. Okay, so second program, We Need to Talk. Joni and Anne both talked about all the things that might stop us driving. So this program we started about 10 years ago. It's a free 90-minute workshop. You can do it in class or online. And basically it's aimed at the siblings that are worried about their parents driving, or maybe friends that are worried about their friends or relatives and how badly they're driving. And how do we approach that? So the key subjects of this is, how do you start the discussion? It doesn't help to tell your dad he's a really terrible driver. That really does not work. It usually shuts dad off and probably stops him talking to you again. So, how do you start that discussion? How do you lead into that? How do you assess driving capabilities? So Anne talked a lot about that, as also with Joni. Everything from basic assessments to full driving assessments that Anne talked about. And then the resources, of being able to stop your dad or other people driving when they're driving badly and unsafely. So a whole bunch of resources there. Hartford has a bunch of brochures that you can get free that talk about these as well as this program. And then finally, the alternative transportation options. I mean, how do you get around if you don't have a car anymore and you can't drive? And you still, of course, need to get around. So the third program we're talking about is CarFit. Hopefully you're all aware of this program. It's a national program co-sponsored by AAA, AARP, and the American Occupational Therapists Association. And the events are held around the state typically. Of course, at this moment with COVID, it's pretty tough. The sessions are 20 minutes typically per vehicle. So a person brings their vehicle in and we go through a bunch of checklists that I'll go through in a minute. Because of COVID, we've been forced to look at how we can do this virtually. So there now is a free virtual class workshop. And that basically takes about 90 minutes. But that goes through these checklists. So the checklist basically is, we check the driving position, make sure the seat's in the right place, make sure they can reach the pedals, all the things that Joni talked about, and safety features, are the seatbelt set right, what happens with the airbag, is your position right to avoid injury from the airbag, things like mirror settings, blind spots, and so on. And probably the most important part is we always have OTs there, occupational therapists, who will go through the possible assistive devices that a person might need if they're in trouble. And they do a sort of a quick physical assessment. And this program is educational. It's not a test. It's not an assessment, but it gives people an idea of where they are. And we find a lot of people come into this program because they've got a new car and they're not sure about the technology. And that kind of leads me to the next program, which is Smart Driver Tech. AARP started this about 4 years ago, and Minnesota was one of the test sites to check the program out as a pilot. There are 90-minute workshops. They're free. Again, typically we do that in class, but they are also available online. And of course, again, COVID's forced us to go virtual. The interactive sessions cover 9 different subjects. So there's a lot of videos showing you how it works and why it works. And then the idea is that people will talk about their own experiences with technology and good or bad, and kind of compare notes. So these are the main subjects, everything from full collision warnings to blind spot warnings. And my favorite, I guess, the coffee cup, the drowsy driver alert, which kind of wakes you up if you start veering from a lane. So all of these are discussed in good detail, and each participant finishes up with a checklist they can take away with them. We have some messages that come out of that. Do not depend on technology. It's there to help you, not to drive the car for you. It can go wrong or actually be wrong. Sometimes blind spot indicators don't always pick up the vehicle next to you. It needs to be kept clean. Minnesota, pretty tough to keep those cameras clean. So you need to know where the cameras are and make sure they're clean. Make sure that you understand you can switch options off. If you have a lane change indicator keep beeping at you and you're really upset with that, you can switch it off because manufacturers' packages typically package all these options together, and they're always switched on when you first get the car. So you need to kind of understand you switch them off, and it won't bite. Try it, you'll like it. That was the message I got when I bought a Mini Cooper a few years back. And the dealers, should give you a full demonstration. So please, when you buy a car, make sure they give you a full demonstration and go back, if you need help. The Mini dealers actually have a special return call, a second date they call it, where they'll answer all the new other questions you've suddenly found in your technologies. So one of the other things we talk about in the technology program is alternative transportation options. Obviously, autonomous vehicles, self-drive vehicles are the panacea. We'd all love to have those and just be able to call up a car and do what Uber's trying to do with automatic vehicles. But I think we all agree that it is quite a long way in the future before we really get this as be a typical use. One of the trends has been, and we talk about this a little, is mobility as a service, MaaS. What this is combining all the existing services like mass transit, trains, buses, and so on, with other services like Uber and Lyft, the hailing services, and even the local community ride shares. And the idea is that if you have this service, it acts kind of like a one-stop shop where you can make a call and set up your ride, kind of like as you would with your buying an air ticket. You would say where you're going to go, when you want to go, and pay for it at the same time. And the key about these programs is we need to make it easy to use. So online reservations, again, like the airline, with a full payment system, easy payment. And because of us slightly older people, some of us are not so sure about using computers and application on the phone. So there always needs to be an alternative reservation using a regular phone. So those are sort of a program that's sort of started to appear now. A couple of examples. ARP has been piloting a program called Ride at 50. That's currently available in South Carolina, Texas, and Michigan. And again, that's a one-stop shop. So basically, you can either use an application on your phone or a single 800 number and call and tell them when you want to go, where you want to go, and they will set it up. And you can pretty much choose what available options you have, whether it's a car picking you up or a bus or whether you just need to go to a train station. The other one locally, I'm pleased to say that in Minnesota, we have a very strong program. Arrowhead Transit Services is a typical example of MaaS. They're working in 10 counties now. And again, you can just do one call, schedule a ride. They'll pick you up even at your house. They have mobility organized transits, so wheelchair users and so on can use the service. So those are really good services. We're hoping that we're going to get this throughout Minnesota eventually through some programs that we're starting to look at. One of the things we know that the 7 regions of MnDOT are doing basically checking to put together lists of all the available transits and transit services. So that will be kind of the starting point. And then we need to talk about the software and the websites and so on that we need to run this type of service. So bottom line is we all need to stay mobile, whatever age, but it's really important that we are very safe. So I'd like to hand it over to Rachel Wilson now to talk about how to set up events.
Thanks, Alan. So a few events that I've been a part of, either as an instructor or coordinating, is teaching two AAA programs. We offer Roadwise Driver, which like Alan talked about earlier, is the program in Minnesota at the 8 hours initially and then 4-hour course every 3 years to recertify. AAA also has a program called Keeping the Keys, and Keeping the Keys is an excellent short program. It can be customized, but it might only be a half hour, 60 minutes. It's great for lunch and learn events. So when you think of reaching out, if you're part of a retirement group, social clubs, if you live in a senior community and you're looking for events, reach out to different people and see if you can have a lunch and learn type event like Keeping the Keys. And this is where we come in and we talk about the main causes of crashes for senior drivers, how to reduce risk, and then a lot of what my co-presenters have talked about already, as far as things like, ways that we can change our driving. And then when we do end up giving up driving, how do we move forward and get around our communities when we're not driving any longer? When you are looking to plan an event, the few things you want to think about, and first and foremost, is what do I want to accomplish? When I'm sitting down and thinking of an event, what is my main goal? Do I want to teach senior drivers about changes in the road, things like roundabouts? Do I want to talk about new vehicle technology like Alan touched on earlier? It could be a combination of things. It could be resources on how to get around the community. So what is the main goal of your event? Then that can lead you into thinking about return on investment. So are you doing this truly for altruistic reasons? Is it just to get out and share safe driving tips? Or are you looking to have some sort of monetary return on this? And then you would need to start looking at your costs versus what you're going to charge your attendees to try to break even or make that profit. When you're looking to plan an event for seniors, you want to think about your target audience, and you might think, well, that's seniors. We can break it down into a little bit more specific groups, and my co-presenters have kind of touched on this already, but it could be, are you talking to seniors that are concerned about loved ones? That's a very different conversation than if you have seniors that are having challenges driving coming to you. So it could be broadly seniors, but it could be broken down into more specific subsets too, and that can help you narrow your focus on your event and what you're looking to get across. And then of course, look at creating an agenda for the event. So is it going to simply just be a quick lunch and learn like our Keeping the Keys program, where you come in while they're having lunch, you talk about how to stay safe on the road for as long as possible. And it can get much bigger than that. It can be an event where you have multiple speakers, where you have tents and booths with people giving giveaways. You could have things like car fit. So it can become much more complicated. So you want to make sure you have that agenda set up and ready to go. Then you want to think about who can help you with this event. So when we think about stakeholders, who are we going to partner with? Who's going to help us run the event? And then they can also step in and help promote the event and fund it as well. So obviously you would be a part of that group, but you could talk to local groups such as AAA. You could talk to people that have senior centers, retirement clubs. Who are those people that you want to partner with to get this event up and running? And then we want to think about who can benefit from being involved. And this is where you might be able to get things for free. So for example, if you want to provide refreshments to your attendees, there may be a local restaurant or bakery that would provide refreshments, light snacks, as a way to promote their business, get some advertising. So think of outside of the box a little bit of who you can partner with to perhaps enhance your event. And then you want to think about, how is this going to be run? Is it just simply you going to teach a class? Do you need other volunteers? Are you bringing in people from local companies, law enforcement? Maybe you're bringing in doctors to talk about changes, nurses, like Joni talked about earlier with her program, maybe emergency responders. So just bringing in outside people that have an expertise that can enhance your event. Pre-event, you want to secure your location, certainly thinking about the size of the event and the size of room that you would need. And also I would say in this time with COVID, thinking about Plan B as a virtual option. Gathering materials, anything that you need, make sure you have in hand well in advance so that you have everything ready to go. Recruit your volunteers, make sure you get that set up early, and then also keep in touch with them every so often to make sure that they know what's going on and they will be there. Promote the event. This can be done in a whole bunch of different ways. You can send out invitations, you can do social media posts, emails, ads, signups through other events. And then don't forget too, if you have anyone you're partnering with, they can promote the event as well. Now, earlier I also mentioned refreshments, but again, think about the refreshments you want to provide. And if you may be able to find somebody that might do that at no cost or reduce cost to you as a way to promote their business. When the day of the event comes, think about setting up your location, arriving really early, making sure all tables, chairs, booths, tents, if you're doing anything outside, all of that is set up well in advance. Refreshments are set up. If you have volunteers, just going over the day, what's going to happen. If it's a really large event, think about having a couple of point people or go-to people that can be the point person if anyone has any issues and make your day easier. Clearly marked areas, especially things like exits, restrooms, water stations, and that sort of thing. And then check, double check, triple check all of your equipment, AV equipment, so that it's working and everything goes smoothly. So these are just 10 tips to try when you are hosting an event. First, make sure you have a compelling or relevant information to share with people coming to you. You know, you don't want it to be just fluff. There should be some good content that they can walk away with really good information. Recruit more volunteers than you think you need, and especially as we get into a larger scale event. If you think you need to have 4, you know, you can't have too much help. Make sure the event location is easily accessible, particularly thinking about handicap accessibility. Is there easy parking, entrances in and out? Are your aisles wide enough? And that sort of thing. Have a check-in station, especially for larger events, but even for classes, somewhere people can check in, sign in, get information that they need, know what room to go to, and so on. Give attendees something to take away. In my experience doing events, people love free stuff, and especially seniors, they love getting that swag. So if you can provide them with you know, different things to take home with them that are both educational and a fun little takeaway, that's always great. Try to make your event as fun as possible. Giveaways, games, keep them engaged. Laughs are always going to be memorable. It can be things simple like raffles, bingo, giveaways. Those all help make it fun. One important thing, make sure you capture information from attendees so you can follow up with them. That can be simply to give more resources in the future. You can send them information about future events. You can talk about news or changes in driving, different options out there to help them stay safe on the road. When the event is over, make sure you reflect on your original goals and objectives and see if you met them. And if you're going to do this event again in the future, think about how you can, you know, change things up to have a better event every time. When you capture information from people attending, make sure you do follow up with them as a thank you, and then also highly recommend a survey so that they can tell you what they thought of the event. And that's an excellent way to just keep making sure that you're improving your event every time you do it. And then don't forget the power of social media. Make sure you share photos and testimonials on your websites through social media channels, and encourage your participants to as well to get the word out. This is just a recap of the 10 I already talked about. So I went through that quickly in the essence of saving some time. So if you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to me or any of my co-presenters. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Scott.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll share my screen. So we have some other things I need to ask you to do. Right here, you can see, let me back up my went the wrong way. Let me get there. There we are. So you see this QR code. The QR code is there for us to, there we go. I can see it, yeah. Thank you. Please, if you have any, to complete the survey, make sure you can hover over this QR code. It'll take you right to the link and you can fill out the information, which gives us feedback for all of our webinars. And also you can see in the chat box, we've also placed in there. So you can go to the TZD website. You can make it easy. You can do it either way. That doesn't matter. Just remember to complete these out as quickly as possible. We do review these. All of our admin reviews these surveys to making sure that we're not only seeing your comments about the presentations, but you might have some suggestions for our panelists in the future or for our TZ webinars in the future. Okay, that being said, it went too far again. We're going to go into the questions and answers. I'll stop sharing my screen. There we go. And you can see I have a few questions here for our panelists. We got short time. We got a few questions that came in, and I'm also checking the chat. So one of the questions that was brought in was, and this is for the group, how many communities in Minnesota have engaged with neighborhood vehicle legislation and implementation? And that's for anybody in.
Sorry, could you repeat the question again, Scott?
So the question was, how many communities in Minnesota have engaged with neighborhood vehicle legislation and implementation? And if we don't know, we don't know. We can move on to the other questions.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't know. I pondered over that question for a long time because I was watching the Q&As come up, and the ones that I knew the answers to, I shot them off.
That's true. Well, we can move on to the next. I guess this is for the panel also. Is there any outcome data defining, or I guess data defining a reduction in crashes and or cost after mature driver education? I guess that's for the program. Do we have any information on that?
Yeah, I know. Well, we know that through research that when people take the driver safety program, 95% of them at least change one bad habit. So, you know, we know that there is some impact there. I don't think we have any specific facts in terms of actually reducing the accidents, but that's one piece of research I know we do have. So,
well, thank you, Alan. Another question: what should I do if someone is driving who is unsafe to drive? So I guess that means someone's out there driving who you know about. What should you do next?
In the state of Minnesota, anyone is able to make a report to the Department of Public Safety about an unsafe driver. If you are the family physician or a family member, your name will remain confidential. If you are not a family member or a physician, your name can be released if the individual contacts the state and asks who reported me. To make a report, you need to provide your name, contact information, and very specifically why you consider the individual to be an unsafe driver. If you don't include that, the state will not follow up on that. But anyone can make that report, and it doesn't have to be in a special forum. You can send a letter, and it will be acted on.
Thank you. Another question. How do I find an occupational therapist that is a driver rehabilitation specialist? That's a mouthful there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, you could look at the handout that I provided with this presentation, but you could also go to the ADED website, aeded.org, and there is a listing of find a driver rehabilitation specialist and type in the area in which you live.
Okay. And then I guess the other one is, how do I find someone to talk about senior driving to my church or neighborhood group?
I think Alan and I both have provided some information that'll be attached in the link, but reaching out to any program that's certified in Minnesota to offer the senior driving class. Of course, AAA offers that. And like Alan had mentioned, AARP would be excellent resources for that.
Yeah, using the typical, what we all do these days is Google senior driver driver classes, and you'll get more than you need to know about all the different places you can get these classes.
That sounds great. And I guess we got time for one last question. Are there any things that a elder can do to keep fit to drive? Someone who's 55 or older, what can they do to stay fit to keep driving?
Drink coffee? No, I would say exercise. Sincerely, exercise maintains your flexibility and strength in your legs, your arms. It increases the blood flow to the brain that helps preserve brain function. Exercise is the thing to be active.
And to add into what Ann was saying, one of the resources that we have typically posted on the TZD website includes some exercises that were developed by the Hartford Foundation that people can just print right off and they can go ahead and use. So there's a lot of things you can do. And one of the other things we've been having them do is practice mind exercises, you know, working on puzzles and mazes and things like that. So keeping active is definitely something I'm finding that our seniors like to learn about too as well. So it complements the physical exercise.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I think on the mental side as well, AARP has a program called Staying Sharp that has a whole bunch of puzzles and memory games, and you can even measure how good your brain is versus other people of your age group. So I'd recommend maybe checking that out as well.
Well, thank you. I want to thank our panelists for the time they took today to come to this webinar and provide important information, not only for our, I call them our seasoned drivers, because I'm in that group now. I think we need to think about a different name. Maybe I'm a little biased. I don't know. And also, for those that are attending the webinar, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to attend. Maybe there's some information that was provided today to give you some resources. And again, check our TZD website. You can check and go into the same webinar here. Life begins at 55, but so might other driving challenges, and we all know they're out there. So please use those resources that are there. And again, from TZD, we thank you for your time. We thank you for your attention in this, and have a nice day.
Can we sign off now? I don't know.
I was just putting that in the chat. Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and your great information. Have a great day.
Thanks, Linda.
Bye-bye.
Linda.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.